Chapter 12 concludes our look at the juvenile justice system and looks at the courts, how people are adjudicated and how their cases are disposed of. So adjudication is basically, we use the same word actually in adult court, but it's the juvenile court decision that the facts alleged against the juvenile are true or not true. So basically, if a judge decides the facts are true, the juvenile committed one or more delinquent offenses, and then a disposition or sentence would be imposed. So dispositions for juveniles can be nominal, conditional, or custodial. So nominal punishments are the least punitive of the three. These are usually verbal warnings or reprimands. A juvenile would be released to the custody of their parents or legal guardians, and that completes the juvenile court action. Conditional one is probation. If you recall, probation is a conditional release. So youths are placed on probation and required to comply with certain conditions. Custodial dispositions could be secure custody or non-secure custody. So non-secure custody would be a foster home, group home, an academy, some type of school, and obviously secure custody would be the equivalent of jail or prison, but for a juvenile. So some things have happened with the juvenile court system. As juveniles gained similar rights to adults, another thing that happened is that the juvenile court practices changed. So there has been some minimizing of the confidentiality of juvenile records. We've seen the time between arrest and disposition be shortened. Attorneys are considered a matter of right, are considered a right. We've seen more juvenile plea bargaining, and we see jury trials for juveniles as well. So as I mentioned before, juveniles can be waived to adult court, and this can happen in a couple of different ways. So there's three ways juveniles can be waived to adult court. One is through a judicial waiver, which means that there's a hearing held before a judge to determine where the juvenile will be tried. Might also be written into the statute, so it could be a statutory waiver where juveniles of a certain age who commit the following crimes are automatically tried as adults, or it could be up to the prosecutor's discretion, and that just means the prosecutor decides which court to file the charges in. Some reasons for this is it allows us to punish juveniles more harshly and to hold serious violent offenders more accountable. The hope is that it also provides a deterrent and overcomes the traditional leniency of the juvenile courts. So in terms of transferred juveniles, and again, this data is a little bit old, but most juveniles transferred are male, and only about little under 5% are females. About 54% of all transferred juveniles are Black or some other minority, despite the fact that white juveniles comprise about 66% of all cases that are actually referred to juvenile court. Those charged with crimes against people are waived to criminal court, and waived to criminal court make up about 41% of those transferred. Another 44% are for public order or property crimes. 14% are for drug offenses. And if you look in your textbook, there's a chart, which is also here, that talks about some of the changes that have happened to the waiver laws by state. So we've got discretionary waivers, presumptive waivers, direct file, and statutory exclusion. And we actually just talked about this. Prosecutorial waivers, judicial or discretionary waivers, legislator or automatic waiver, and demand waiver. So take a minute when you have a chance to actually review these slides, but we did just talk about this. So once you've been waived to criminal court, all of your cases from that point forward will be treated as an adult crime. So once an adult, always an adult for the purposes of criminal prosecution. All juveniles who are waived are entitled to a waiver hearing, and this is the formal proceeding designed to determine whether the waiver action taken by the judge or the prosecutor is correct. So why might you actually want to have your case heard in juvenile court? Well, juvenile court proceedings are civil, not criminal, and so you don't acquire a criminal record if you've been sentenced as a juvenile. This is why you're allowed to answer on job applications that you have never been convicted of a crime if you were a minor. Juveniles are also less likely to receive incarceration. There's a lot more public sympathy towards those in the juvenile justice system. Also, once we move out of the juvenile justice system, we start to see things like life imprisonment. In terms of having your case heard in criminal court, juvenile court judges do have the power to administer lengthy sentences, even for status offenders. In most states, juvenile courts don't have to provide you with a jury trial, but you would be entitled to one in an adult court. Also, you would then have the full range of constitutional rights available to adults. Despite this, you generally don't want to be waived to adult court. We also have what's called a blended sentence, and this is written up in statute in some states. And this basically allows someone to impose part juvenile sentence and part adult sentence. It's usually based on age and a combination of age and offense, and there's several different models. We've also seen the development of teen courts. So we see the development of quite a few what we call specialty courts. Drug courts are probably the most well-known, but there are also teen courts. These are informal jury proceedings, and the jurors are teenagers who hear and decide minor cases. In 1997, there were 75 of these courts, and by 2005, there were over 1,000. There's 4 different models. One has an adult judge, one has a youth judge, one has a peer jury, and one is a tribunal. Whether or not these are successful, we have seen recidivism rates here, but they haven't been studied consistently, but we do tend to see that recidivism rates are very low. One positive that's been reported from these courts is that many youth emerge with a greater understanding for the law. Some trends we might see developing in juvenile court. We might see more discussion about the legal rights of juvenile, how they're prosecuted, diversion, probation, and intermediate sanctions as well. And that wraps up our material on juvenile courts.